Alright, stay calm, man.
My name is Micah, and just as a disclaimer, I am not affiliated in any way with Walt Williams. I would be very surprised if he saw this video, much less agreed with anything that I say in it. This is just a bit of a think piece. This video, however, will contain spoilers for Spec Ops: The Line.
Flying over the middle of the Rubel Kali Desert, looking for some lost city in the sand. Next thing I know, plane's going down. I'm hanging like a rag doll at 30,000 feet, just trying to hold on.
And a plague on every corner. When half the city hated me, and the other half wanted me dead. He brought out my good side.
I'm telling you, war has changed. So you do what you have to. I'm no hero. But whatever good I've done, it was him.
It was in the days of suffering, when the gods made their might known. When no mortal dared stand up to Zeus. He did.
Omaha. Pinned down on that godforsaken beach. Thinking if I lay there, I'll maybe die. But if I get up, there ain't no maybe about it. Then one man broke through. Michael.
When the Templars murdered my family. When the whole bloody world's gone crazy.
Hellgang, Sector 9!
To Michael!
To Michael!
For all he does. For all of us. To Michael.
To Michael! To Michael! To Michael!
I love this commercial a little too much because it's a little too perfect. I remember watching it back in the day and seeing that Kratos cosplay, and my first thoughts being, it really doesn't look like he's had a cranial aneurysm at all. It looks like this company understands exactly who I am, what I'm here to do, and that a $249 price tag ain't that bad for a PlayStation 3. Oh geez, boys. Sweet. It's kind of like this commercial caters to people who don't already own PlayStation products. Hits me right here in the feels, his name is almost like mine, makes me flip out. I can't be the only one who is kind of worn out on the way the games industry handles its marketing side. Developer interviews, community interaction, and commercials and trailers seem limited to promotional purposes rather than artistic ones. Sony vie for my wallet, which transforms me into an entertainment and value-seeking snob, desperate for validation in the form of cosplays that Nolan North needs to loop audio to. People made this. People sat down and decoded exactly what they knew I wanted to feel. They made games out of it, and they made a commercial out of those. I feel very, very assured that the side of the industry I'm seeing reflected in the video I'm watching right now is concerned with being art before it is concerned with anything else.
How do you get into writing video games?
Well, I mean, the first thing about writing video games is if you can't, off the top of your head, come up with 10 different ways to say, cover me, I'm reloading, probably should do something else.
Walt Williams is the creator who taught me there's another end to the chain of assurances that this thinking goes down. He's worked on over 35 titles and over a decade of his career in the video game industry. And he did so by heading up the writing on a game that means an awful lot to me, and by getting the chance to actually talk about it and its intricacies somewhere. He talked about it in this book, Significant Zero. I went through and underlined so much of it because most of this is gold. When I played games, I didn't have to be Walt with the big ears or the Coke bottle glasses. I could be strong, capable, and most of all, important. That was the real fantasy, I think, not power or heroism, but relevancy. In those games, I mattered. Now, I found this book to be intensely fascinating. However, one of the aspects of his career that came as a bit of a shock was just how far he pushed himself to make games. 16-hour work days starting and ending with half a packet of peanut M&Ms for months and scheduled shots of Red Bull like clockwork. It sounds disgusting, if I'm honest. The only thing keeping me upright was a diet of Adderall, Red Bull, and cheap red wine, which was necessary to numb the pain of a bulging disc at the base of my neck. Thank God I was living my dream, or else I'd have really felt like shit. He mentions how after years he finally began sleeping in his office and that it felt totally natural. He mentions how during a particularly grueling period of development in a foreign country, he took shelter in an alleyway to get out of the rain and began crying so hard that he had to sit down. He breaks down the pseudoscience of crunch and what the process of slaving over a game really feels like. And it's one thing for me to take for granted how trying game development can be, but another to read about what it's really like. I can only imagine what it feels like to actually do. In this industry, we all make sacrifices. Love, life, health, those things we're told we cannot live without. It's natural to wish things weren't this way, but it won't change anything. You can either agree to the cost or move on with your life. Those who rail against it are either naive or bitter. They paid the price and didn't go as far as they'd hoped. That's the risk you take. Being an artist is not easy. Selling your soul won't always grant a profit. Williams speaks about community interaction in all of this as a processed, rehearsed chore, only made worthwhile in small bursts of light. And he spends the entire book breaking down the psychology of the player, regularly landing hits where it hurts the most. And I have to keep reminding myself that this guy and all the other people who work in the industry not only know how I think about games, they designed how I think about games. Why was I surprised that I'm as open as a book to them? Games design choices that clearly state the player's options and outcomes so they can decide who they are and how the world will see them. Make your choice, the game will reinforce your personal fantasy. Moral choices offer players validation instead of revelation because in games, choice is synonymous with player agency. Moral choices conveniently shift the burden of morality from the designer to the player. Unlike other artistic media, games are treated as a form of audience expression rather than the artists. We've spent years telling players, this is about what you want to do. And we've been asking these questions for so long that we've forgotten how to ask ourselves, what do I want? What am I doing? What does this mean? You should strive to make your game as engaging as possible. Moral choices can do that, but only if you resist the pathological need to validate the player. Williams spends a lot of time talking about just how strongly the industry is geared toward player empowerment. He paints a picture of how frequently games play into accommodating a player's fantasy within their design, and how the industry's goals at large reflect that intention. It sounds cynical, but it rings far too true for me to deny. I've played too many games that seek to make me feel good about myself that it, at some points, at most points, has become why I seek to play them. Games give me friends, give me status and purpose within them. Even hard games are only hard, so I feel like an extra big boy when I win. He also details his work on several notable games such as BioShock and its sequel, Mafia 2, The Darkness 2, and a few others. He tells of a moment when, in writing simple street NPC dialogue, or barks, for Mafia 2, he grew bored and numb enough to try entertaining himself. Now let me tell you what this entails. He has to write 4 lines on one subject for each type of NPC on a writing spreadsheet. It sounds like a barrel of laughs. And because after 7 hours of doing this kind of banal crap of, hello, would you like to buy a gun at my store? He wanted to impale his own face on a pencil, and I totally understand it. So eventually he would write just one throwaway line just for laughs to give himself some reason to keep slogging away at this work that he hated. However, these lines ended up getting the attention of his superior because they were quite funny, and he ended up working on the voice recording for the game, which sent his career in a bit of a new direction. His focus became on injecting personality into the game writing over the formality required of him. And he describes a similar approach to writing small but hilarious stories for characters in The Darkness 2, a project he only signed on to because he needed to get away from writing heavier things, as in the John Mayer album. He took the formality present in the need for NPC dialogue and made it something special, both because he's good at what he does and because he wanted to keep himself sane. And this is a bit of a theme within the book, moments where he sidesteps expectation or formality on a whim and decided to write something or do something just for himself. It didn't always pan out, and sometimes he overstepped his bounds, but it's this brazen confidence amidst the turmoil of game development that got him noticed, and eventually put him where he wanted to be. And it surprised me, and it shouldn't have, just how similar making games is to other industries in so many ways. It's not some mystical fairy tale where everyone loves everything they do, or everyone's ideas are welcome. It's not even a place where art gets made. It's a place where work is done. Video games may be art, he says, but not all of us are artists whose personal visions must be allowed to blossom like a delicate flower. Our value is not measured in ideas, but our ability to execute. A team needs to know you have their back. Don't like the task you've been given? Let go of your ego, find an angle that interests you, and then bring it to life like it's the last thing you'll ever create. I guarantee it will be unforgettable. And he also says, as a writer, your loyalty is to the game, not to yourself or the player. Betraying that loyalty is the only way you can fail. And this particular sentiment of having loyalty to the game is one that I've seen echoed in other game creators too. So we can take these kinds of smaller decisions made by a single person working on a game and apply it to some larger examples. Now, it's fairly common knowledge that Hidetaka Miyazaki, the innovator behind the Souls series, managed to get himself into a situation directing Demon's Souls, and used the opportunity to turn the game into something unique. And the company already considered the game to be a failure, which allowed Miyazaki to place features into the game that wouldn't have been approved of had the game been of a higher priority for the developer. Obviously, his work and ideas have promoted him to legendary status, his fresh ideas revered beyond measure despite how late into the industry he arrived. Bruce Straley and Neil Druckmann of Naughty Dog were not involved in the production of Uncharted 3, instead began working with a bit of a smaller team on The Last of Us, a passion project that they wanted more control of. It has an over-the-shoulder camera, so obviously it was a huge success. But most notably, it was a self-contained story about its two central characters, taking a sharply different artistic direction from the Uncharted series. But it ultimately created what was a story about the characters, not really about the player. Now, the members of the dev studio Yacht Club were all working for a separate company, churning out licensed games on a steady paycheck, and they, just friends at lunch, talked about wanting to build their own Nintendo game, which ended up being Spade Warrior. They each left the studio they were at, betting everything they had on savings and a Kickstarter to make a project they believed in and wanted to see created. The game is obviously a smash hit, and Shovel Knight eventually received his very own Nintendo Amiibo. Everybody say, "Aww." Aww. And then there's the big one for me, which is game director Sefton Hill. He directed Rocksteady's Batman Arkham franchise, and here's something I find very interesting that he said in an interview about Batman Arkham Knight.
Well, I guess you had more responsibility with existing characters to get that right.
Yeah, definitely. You feel that responsibility for sure. Again, sort of strangely enough, you try and ignore the feeling of responsibility because it restricts you creatively if you start to get worried what everyone's going to think about it, and you just think, we'll go for it, and if people don't like it, that's kind of something that we really try and maintain from Arkham Asylum, is that we almost had a sort of naivety to the way we approached the game that I think was really empowering for us, because we never knew we were going to sell millions of copies. We just thought, this is our Batman game. So we'll just do the Batman game we want to make. And thankfully people really like that, but we never tried to sort of kind of pander to it in a sense or try and appease people. And I think my belief is that if you do that, you end up with something quite mediocre, because it's not offensive in any way, but it's also not interesting. So we wanted to keep it really more edgy and interesting.
And yet from the fan and community response, and at one time my own, you could easily gather that the Batman of Arkham Knight, and by extension the wider game, was a disappointing failure. And needless to say, this confuses me a little bit. Arkham Knight is a fully formed, intensely entertaining game with a fantastic original story and a really singular artistic vision that I believe it to have more than achieved. I congratulate Rocksteady for making the game that they wanted to make, not the one they were told to, and the lack of understanding or acceptance of interpretation that the game has largely received, including from a younger version of myself, disheartens me a little bit. And after hearing that Arkham Asylum was like a real passion project for these people, I realized that I've made mistakes in how I've looked at this series, even after having really tried to look at it. I used to think I was owed something from these people, and it frustrated me that at times I was part of such an entitled community. It seems a dime gets you a dozen people willing and eager to tell you how a particular game should have been made, responding to the difficulties of game development or even any creative process with a total lack of understanding because we don't understand it. And I am not exempt from this. It's true that the industry is difficult to learn about, but I've learned that this kind of criticism results in the same kinds of conversation, dead ends of game analysis that I expect those who work on games gain very little from. What use is it to tell a developer or a publisher that they did something wrong when we don't acknowledge what they were trying to do, or seek to understand the context around why they had to make that particular choice? It's kind of like we're forgetting that creatives are the first people to criticize their own work. After reading up on all this stuff and trying to learn more, I can almost guarantee you that if you find a flaw in a game, the people who made the game are well aware of it. The difficult part comes with deciding what weight those flaws hold within the spectrum of the wider game, because nothing is perfect, nothing's going to appeal to everyone. And on top of that, in general, if I criticize a game for a particular aspect, I try to brainstorm a solution to that problem. And if I can't think of a way to mend the seam, preferably without altering major aspects of the game, I find myself at a point of understanding. Developers and publishers work within all kinds of constraints, within all kinds of teams, and they work longer hours than me. Sometimes they just have to accept these things and move on. According to Walt Williams, AAA development studios are not artists. They are companies founded on the premise that you can make money by making art. There's nothing wrong with that. Greed and artistic intent are not mutually exclusive, and we all have bills to pay. And I think he's right. And this doesn't have to be complicated. It doesn't have to be either the greatest or the worst thing in the world. It can kind of just be what it is, an expression of the creativity of the people who made the game, and something that you can, at the end of the day, take or leave. Basically what I mean is that it takes the proper context to appreciate and judge each individual game for what it really is, and that context is not defined by post-release review scores or what other people say or even the bloody marketing. It's defined by the game and its circumstances of creation, and that's something I want to be more aware of when I talk about this kind of stuff. It's up to you to take the right perspective on what it is you're looking at, and ultimately, the game doesn't need to connect you to what it's doing, because the loyalty is to the game.
No matter how hard I tried, I never could escape the reality of what happened here. That was my downfall. There, finished. I hope you like it.
What the hell is going on?
Your eyes are opening for the first time. It hurts, doesn't it? Go on. What do you think?
You did this.
No, you did. Your orders killed 47 innocent people. Someone has to pay for your crimes, Walker. Who's it going to be?
Spec Ops: The Line is largely perceived as a critical success, but a bit of a commercial failure. It's discussed as anything from a real war story to a commentary on violence in games, but in my view, and after having read this book, I think it's definitely offering comment on players of that time period, around 2010 more than anything else. The full writing team for Spec Ops: The Line consisted of Chad Rocco, George Struck, Jack Skalicki, Richard PSA, Sean Friesen, and Walt Williams. Now, it's the story of a squad of elite soldiers who delve into a version of Dubai destroyed by sandstorms to find any survivors, after the commander of a lost American battalion also stationed there is suddenly heard after a long silence. The team and the player delve so far into Dubai that it transforms into a mirror in which the player's own face is reflected, reminding them that the trigger of the gun they're holding requires an active choice to pull. A few of my favourite chapters in Williams' book describe a few of his roundtable discussions with the other writers and lead designers of the game at Jaeger in Germany, where it was developed, and his surrounding process talk. Putting these pieces together illuminated to me anew both how the line was formed from Williams' beliefs on form, and what the game represents to me. And remember what I said about context? Well, here's some context. I have a convenient book that lays it all out in elegant quotes for me. How handy! Now, Williams, as someone who worked for 2K Games, the game's publisher, was essentially loaned out to Jaeger to help them write the game and to oversee the narrative side. Some hilarious things happened with the in-house writer, and Williams ended up taking the reins. The publishing team kept Jaeger's basic pitch of a 3-man military squad fighting in present-day Dubai, and That was it. Williams had been waiting for this kind of creative freedom for a long time, and even though he had no affinity for the shooter genre, he grabbed the opportunity with both hands. He knew that this had the potential to be a big deal. Between development and marketing, an average AAA game will cost between $20 and $50 million to produce, but it's not uncommon for budgets to stretch well past $100 million. When you've got that much scratch on the line, you stick to what sells. Guns and glory. Development was hard, as it always is for AAA studios. Early in the process, however, the team decided to focus themselves on making a game about people, not about war. This was due to the premise of the game not being able to set the game apart very well on its own. The industry was getting off on grid at the time, so the team applied some thinking to it and embraced the darkness, but in a story sense. The team wanted to say something that mattered, so the amount of freedom they had within their premise afforded them that opportunity. The development for the game started in 2007 for an initial release date in 2009, but things kept getting delayed and stuck. The game eventually released in 2012, where they reported around 20 main scripts for the game's story, and the main twist of the narrative only being proposed by Williams into the game's final version. And because art inevitably reflects the world around it, Williams' initial goal of saying something that mattered in a game reflected the loneliness and darkness he was feeling, because this was taking so long and he was stuck in the mindset of this incredibly somber game for 5 years. The story, no matter what shape it takes, is just spin. A tool to help explain who you're fighting and why it's okay to shoot them, burn them, and blow them into bits. I am the minister of propaganda to the game's one true ruler. That person-shaped void we call the player. And all of us, writers, designers, artists, and programmers, serve at its pleasure. The player is the only human element in the game as it is being played, and yet they bring no humanity to it. They are limited to the systems we build. And a system, no matter how deep, is a poor replacement for humanity. Gameplay is a cold, incorporeal skeleton kept in motion by the organs and muscles of a game's systems. It will never create the immersive experience we're all looking for. The humanity required to ignite our empathy can only come from story. So if the gameplay is cold and needs humanity, but the line is trying to say something that matters while it has to stick to what sells, read derivative, and the constant rewrites and development hurdles cast Williams and his team into deep depressive states, and there is a master looming over all of them in the form of the player, bad stories ignore their constraints. Good stories work within them. Great stories embrace external constraints and repurpose them as core elements of the narrative. I want to make very clear that I'm well aware that Walt Williams is not the only person who made the line what it is, nor is his viewpoint the only one that counts. Much credit for the game's creation also goes to creative lead and design director Corey Davis, and narrative designer and co-writer Richard Pearce, among so many other people. It seems they wanted to turn things on their head and to make you think, and at its core this game is just a solid, good story, another thing you can take or leave. This is just my own interpretation of the game, and one I will very likely disagree with again later at some point. To understand my approach to this story, it's important to remember that guns and glory sell, and this genre has tropes and expectations attached. I believe that the functions the characters and gameplay serve within the plot are the focus here. This means I believe that the gameplay functions and those expectations of this genre themselves hold more power within the story than the plot points themselves. The game still ticks every box it needs to be the game you expect it to be from a gameplay standpoint, but something's changed. So how exactly does the line embrace and repurpose those constraints? Well, it starts on a weird note by giving you exactly what you expect in the form of a 6-foot-tall mesomorph who's got a better complexion than a Maybelline model and looks better in the Dubai sun than a Maybelline model or something. Captain Walker, at least at the beginning of the story, would probably enjoy a beer. Maybe he'd grab one down at the Michael bar, socialize with some of the other characters. And I know it might sound weird, but I think he'd fit right in. He's noble, he's driven, he's capable, all-American, a US soldier and therefore worthy of respect. He's played by the same man as Nathan Drake and has the same haircut as half the other men in the room. He's male and white, fits the bill, so to speak. During the game, he's focused on the mission, on saving people, so boxed into the mindset of where he's going, what he's doing, and how important he is that the idea of a larger picture, it becomes impossible for him to understand. He is the embodiment of a player's moment-to-moment focus and a disregard of wider consequences. He is an ordinary character. His story would sound just like one of these people. But the game places him, player fantasy, into a world and into situations that flatly refuse to accommodate him. He is unable to articulate or explain player fantasy, but no matter the situation, he is incapable of evolving from it. This isn't playing out the way it was supposed to, and he seems to be mentally restricted from understanding why. His pride gets in the way of sense, and as the world falls down around him, his purpose as a player fantasy makes less and less sense, but he continues to act as a player fantasy would. He's doing all these things that in any other game would be commonplace, but instead of everybody being on board, his purpose as a player character condemns him to be alone in his desires and objectives. And at other points, he is placed into horrifying and tense situations that no ordinary character would ever be in, and his response to those situations is restricted to what the player can do with their gun, just like any other playable character. He is the only AAA factor inside a world that he cannot adjust to. He is a fish truly out of water. His voice grows to represent a player's own frustration in having to reload or take damage in battle.
This is slowing me down.
His only response to things going wrong is blame and frustration and false sincerity and disregard of responsibility. I'd be doing myself a disservice if I didn't at least mention the voice acting here. Captain Walker is played by Nolan North, who is both one of the most reliable and prolific actors in the industry. His work is always solid, but he slips in and out of grandeur depending on the script and direction, just like any actor would. His character in God of War 2018, for instance, never didn't sound like Nolan North doing a voice to me. But if you give him a good script and a good director, he makes that shit sing like only a few dozen people can. As Martin Walker, he sounds as serious and as believable in these shoes as he ever has, and it makes all the difference in the world. I do not hear Nolan here, I hear Walker, and he sounds like he means every word.
We need to keep moving.
What?
Reinforcements will be here any second. We need to keep moving.
But Walker, you're not even...
I'm gonna make these bastards pay for what they've done. Now, are you with me or not?
This is so difficult to explain, but the beauty of Captain Walker lies in the repetition of his rhetoric. His mantra of,
We tried to save you.
is to him as honest as it gets. He believes that as a player character, this world he is in must revolve around him and must do what he says for his benefit and appraisal. He keeps pushing forward because he believes there is vindication in victory and that it must come eventually because it always does. He is a fantasy. He cannot blame himself for his transgressions because they are only bumps on the way to revelation. He makes terrible decisions and does unspeakable things that he cannot confront, but I've never seen this character as an insane soldier so much as a fixed point. This is why he begins hearing the voice of Colonel Conrad and imagining a choice scenario made just for him. He has to compensate for his lack of control by believing himself a victim. The fantasy does not have the ability to cave in on itself until it has run out of options. His character development is a beautiful thing because he cannot and does not develop. He does not have a choice in how he feels about this, and he is only like this because he is the player character. And yet at the same time, he as a character is the only factor within the game giving the player objectives and goals. He is the one who finds the clues to lead to the next area and says that people have to go there. Nothing exterior enforces these decisions but the player's action. The player character lays down the player's options and goals to the continuous objection of every other body in the game.
Coast is clear, Walker.
Then gear up. We're moving out.
Where to now?
Before the storms hit, Conrad needed a lookout. Somewhere he could see Dubai from miles around. There. Tallest tower in Dubai. That's where to.
Walker, we need to talk about what happened back there.
We got Conrad's attention. What's there to talk about?
Never seen you like this before.
I'm fine, Adams. We can't walk away from what we've seen here. We're not leaving Dubai until the survivors can be safely evacuated. I just need you to trust me on this.
I trust you, Walker. I just don't agree with you.
The game knows what you think agency is, and it thinks you are wrong. It thinks you aren't going far enough.
I think we're clear for now. We need to keep moving. Can you walk?
I'm fine.
Good. We need to find Lugo, then we take care of Conrad. I think we can still save these people, and I'm not gonna let him stand in our way.
Right, because that plan's worked out great so far.
Wasn't asking your opinion, Lieutenant.
So as a player character inside a world that he cannot control, he, in both gameplay and story, must take out this frustration on the very few things he does have control over, namely his two NPC buddies. Adams and Lugo deteriorate greatly over the course of the game because they're not the player fantasy, but every time they try to stop and to think about how messy this has gotten, Walker shuts them down by reminding them that they're just soldiers.
Damn well that's not what I'm talking about.
There's something on your mind. Why don't you say it already so we can get back to work?
This whole mission is fucked. We just took out a tower full of American troops.
They didn't leave us any choice.
You didn't leave us any choice. What the fuck happened to us, man?
Nothing. We're fucking soldiers.
Oh, I see. My mistake.
So, in other words, screw you, you're an NPC. Both Adams and Lugo frequently fight Walker's demands, but must follow through with them because that is what the game has designed them to do, to follow and to take commands. They hate what they are doing, but they simply do not have a choice. It's like everyone knows this is somehow a game, but can't say it aloud. They too are mentally restricted. Walker downplays their concerns as if he's dancing on the edge of screaming, "This is about me and you have to play along, stop, god damn it, stop." And this is disguised as his higher rank.
You think I like watching these people die, huh? You think I won't carry this shit to my fucking grave?
Stand down! Both of you! Stand the fuck down! The fuck is wrong with you two? We're in the middle of a fucking war zone, and you're fighting in the dirt like a couple of goddamn kids! You are Delta operators. Fucking act like it! All right then. We good?
Yeah.
Lugo!
Yes, sir.
Good. Now let's keep moving.
So these are the story's constraints, which it hopes to embrace and contextualize if it wants to become great. That is what the lead writer believes that he needs to do. It was written by a man who believes that gameplay cannot convey true humanity on its own, and a game requires story to fill that gap if it wants to inspire empathy and emotion. Furthermore, the gameplay it has to work with are those elements home to a derivative genre, and because of the grueling development of the game taking so long, the game's story grew to reflect that trying time. So the game manages to embrace these constraints not by doing things, but by not doing things. Yes, I am somehow arguing that this incredibly violent game's secret ingredient lies in its restraint. The line was written by Walt Williams, who had to scrape and crawl his way to the position he was in through dedication and new thinking, by sacrificing everything he had to give people what they wanted in games for years. And this game happens when he and his colleagues understand that a game with a moral choice and with every other system is supposed to validate the player. This is how the industry works. And The Lion is the game that simply decided not to hold up its end of the bargain. This is the only thing that's changed. It doesn't throw you a scrap. It's clear what kind of a world we wish for. Its design has repeatedly appeared in our games for decades. Our perfect world is not devoid of struggle or opposition, but the path to victory is much more certain. Hard work always results in positive growth, a growth measured in strength and power. What once held us back can be easily overcome if we just put in the grind. It tries to remind you that the fantasy that AAA games present is only a spin given through story by not spinning the story. So the constraint upon saying something that matters inside a derivative genre is repurposed by talking about that genre and why it doesn't matter. Remember, a story spin is there to weave the rest of the game together and act as a construct the rest of the game can shine through. In this case, Williams believed his job was to make violence tolerable so a player could enjoy it and have a reason to do it. Instead of being amicable and simply giving players a good reason to shoot their enemies with a story of fighting terrorists, it simply doesn't give you a reason to shoot them to see if you will anyway. It's saying you're always the same monster, the same stranger come to town when you play posing as a hero, but how do you feel about that when you say it aloud and no one responds? It deals with the constraint that gameplay cannot convey true humanity by structuring the world and story around that point. You're put into a world that does not need a gun, and you are given a gun. Find some humanity in what you can do with that. This is where the moral choices come to mind. They're not binary because they involve the gameplay mechanics, so in a way, every situation is a moral choice. Technically, you can do whatever you like, but because you are working within the systems a developer builds, you cannot truly act as you should. Still, the game absolutely believes that not only is a choice inside the game a form of player agency, the choice to play the game is a form of agency, yet again because of the lack of story spin. And the only possible humane response that a player has to the events inside this game would be to stop playing, because they will only get worse. So more importantly, perhaps most importantly, anything you know or have previously encountered about player feedback loops on either system or story levels is not in the line. I'm talking no unlocks, no leveling up, no stream of rewards, no useful loot, anything like that. The tools you start the game with are the same you have at the end. Eco has more ability progression than this. This means you are given no in-game incentive to play the game, and your only objective is defined by your own character, who continuously disregards the constant suggestions to stop for no reason at all. If you pay attention to the story, you never actually succeed at anything you set out to do over the course of the game, and you never get stronger. The game never tells you you have done a good job, and this is the most central decision the game makes. And of course, the game repurposes the pressures of development by making the game about them, and by pulling back the curtain on what the biggest pressure is, appeasing the player, and simply refusing to do it. The one reward the game sees fit to give you after this hellscape of a plot is this guard of honor right here at the end, at the bottom of the welcome tower. 2 lines of soldiers saluting you and say pretty much verbatim, "Hey Captain Walker, we're all that's left of the damn 33rd. We surrender, Dubai is yours." And it feels so hollow. And the game does all this to be honest with you, and to show you just how fragile you are. What these fantasies are built on is so simple, so easy to exploit. So if everything about the player stays the same, but the game just doesn't pat you on the head, what does that affect? What changes? Well, pretty much everything, it would seem. What reward can you give yourself? Can you provide your own reinforcement if one of the sides of the scale just stops pretending? Can you do this on your own? To say that this gets to me is an understatement. This game scares me. While barely ever breaking the fourth wall, it aims right at me. It feels so intimate, so personal. It understands me and how precious I am with this medium. It feels like it looks me dead in the eye while it covers us both in gasoline, lights a match and says it won't flinch if I don't. And my god, I think I'm a coward. I wasn't exposed to very many violent games growing up. I had to wait until I was old enough to legally play them because I was a rat boy. And since so many games aim for an adult market, this restricted the kind of games I could play. And this in turn led to a deep fascination and a reverence of games like The Line, like shooters like BioShock and Uncharted and other highly rated but highly violent video games. These were real games that real gamers played. They were alien and cool and fascinating. And once I aged up, I could really sink my teeth into them. I could finally talk to my school friends about the games they were already playing, like Skyrim and Assassin's Creed and Call of Duty. I could finally see what it was all about. And when I turned 15, this whole new world opened up to me, and I was a kid in a candy store of catching up to do. I got into some stealth games and shooters, and role-playing most of all. I ran wild with these fantasies. But then I played The Line, and I didn't really understand what it all meant, but I got enough. And since I wasn't really exposed to violence very much, it wasn't normal for me yet at all, so this game really, really shook me. But I'm very grateful for that. I'm very grateful to have gotten the full gravity of this thing, and it's informed how I've looked at art and games and life ever since. It's been 6 years of games between then and now, but I was emotionally unable to replay the game past a certain point until yesterday. And I found that it's even more relevant to me now than it ever was. But the best part of The Line, the part that I couldn't see before, is that it isn't necessarily a condemnation at all. It's a question. A question of where you on the scale as an individual fall when looking at the relationship between a player and a developer. Who holds more power? Who gets the most blame? Why does a player require the developer's affection for this all to work when players every time bite the hand that feeds? Why does the person who painted the picture need to show it to someone for it to be real? There are no correct answers here, just reality, just you. The game is trying to make sure you know exactly what the idea of this fantasy really entails and requires from both sides. Because the line at the end of the day is not about war, it's not about fun, it's not about condemning violence in video games, it's about how you think about games. And how all the people in the industry designed how you think about games. And frankly, I don't give a shit if you don't enjoy it, think that it's not a good game. I believe that it's incredibly special and a very, very important message to send. Even if our medium persists until the stars die out, the games we make now won't be around to see it. They are temporary, like us. It's their impermanence that makes them truly unique. Games as an art form reflect humanity by embodying our mortality, self-indulgence, and delusions. In this way, games are more than entertainment. Even though you and I may never meet, our lives have already overlapped. And Walt Williams taught me that as a gamer, I will never be pleased. As someone who critically analyzes these works, I will never find ultimate satisfaction in a game. He taught me that I'm impatient and that my naivety fuels an industry that leaves its members crying in alleyways. He taught me that the godlike cloud of the player dictates the lives of those who strive to please it. He taught me that his industry is fundamentally crippled by the intent to please me, and I saw that in his book. I saw there's a center of humanity in games development that is entirely veiled by how we market and judge the products that they torture themselves to create. And he taught me that I've had enough of that. Because, you know, God forbid, I admit that other people make better games than I could, have better ideas than I do, and know more about development than I ever will. There are more things going on behind the scenes than I could ever understand. Video games mean an awful lot to me, and I want to talk about them with people, but I'll never be able to say something worthwhile if I don't try to learn. Because for some reason, I'm okay with these fantasies. I cannot deny that. Spec Ops asked me if I'm okay with this, and I have to be. It means too much. I want to feel important and included in video games. I want to be a part of these stories. I am here because I want to feel like something I'm not. And the form that takes is questionable and complicated, but it doesn't and it can't make me want it any less. But I can't do this on my own, and I have to stop pretending that I can. And I don't want to belie myself with all this. Fantasy is human and beautiful. Fantasy is an intrinsic part of art. Imagination is not evil, but it's also not absolute. And the game doesn't need to be my fantasy. I love when a game makes me feel important and relevant, like I matter. It's part of what makes games an escape, but creatives don't exist at my whim purely to make me feel good about myself, and there's a problem with me believing that's the only thing they're for. I have to be so careful not to judge their desire to express themselves using only the size and shape of my desire for relevancy and validation. I will come up wanting every time. Why do you think I have a YouTube channel? Even if AAA development studios are not artists, they are often led by people who have visions and things they want to do and say within the game. And the loyalty must be to the game. At the time of writing, E3 2018 is just about to start, and I'm curious to see how many games will follow tradition. I don't expect Sony or any other companies not to vie for wallets by appealing to this innate part of us, both in marketing and in the design of the games that they put forth. They'll pander and they'll patronize and buzzwords will fly. So I'll be watching, but watching with care, because I need to know better. Spec Ops: The Line feels bigger than itself to me, and that's very rare. I don't know the answers to all its questions, I don't think anybody does, but I know these faces throwing this hyperbole around about how special and different games are, and how I'm the most important individual in a room full of other people being told the same thing, aren't the stories I care about and aren't what I look for. There's something off about a huge gathering of people celebrating products we will separately indulge in dark rooms on our own. I don't see how that connects. And I don't want to get my hopes up about anything, because, you know, confirmation bias plagues video game criticism and discussion. I would know. I checked. Before I go, I just want to tell you one more thing I know. I know that Assassin's Creed Syndicate is not one of humanity's foremost achievements, but I've played the entire game through twice just so I can do this. And I find it electrifying walking through London, feeling like one of the people, not bothering anyone, not climbing anything. This game is so good at making me feel like an ordinary person just in a different place. It's proper to me. This is like my favourite place in games, this city. I've known myself to get homesick for it. And it's special. It feels like I matter, but I don't at the same time. I choose to make the world bigger than me when playing like this. Because I feel like there's some security in insignificance. I honestly think I prefer it. Don't know where I got that from. Thank you very, very much for watching if you've stuck around till now. While making this video, I honestly didn't know what I was doing, but I made it for me, and if you enjoyed it, I'd really, really appreciate any support you've got to give. Down in the description below, there's a bunch of links to info and sources for this video, including a store link to Walt Williams' book, Significant Zero, which I highly recommend you pick up. Thank you again very much for watching. My name is Micah, and best of luck.